Thank you. Please tell me if the slides are running. I will ask when I begin to run. The Mishnah counts Doeg and Achitophel among the 4 commoners who have no share in the world to come, as opposed to the reward promised to all of Israel. Scholars have been very involved in trying to decipher the symbolism of the identity of the 4 commoners. Although there is not complete agreement among the scholars, many have indicated that they represent 4 key personalities in early Christianity, or at the very least, ascending sects and enemy religions of the Pharisee Jews. Scholars identify Doeg and Achitophel as well as Gehazi as representation of Jesus. However, others disagreed with this view and pointed to the necessary caution needs in making such parallels. In my lecture, I plan to reinforce the symbolic polemical assumption attributed to their identity and to trace the development of the traditions related to these 2 characters. I will propose that Doeg and Achitophel fulfill a number of roles in the Judeo-Christian polemic. I will continue with several comments on the methodology. Extreme caution must be exercised in a study of this kind. Identifying polemic trends in the sages' homilies is a sensitive and complex task, one that for several reasons demands great care in drawing conclusions. You see the first one? Is it running? The slides?
Yeah,
Okay.
3 comments on methodology.
Okay. The wording of most of the polemic homilies is not explicit, meaning that they do not directly address the enemy and they do not present the opinion that they wish to negate. There are only very few homilies that directly address sections of the population, such as the heretics or nation of the world, or those people who represent the mistaken opinion, such as if someone tell you or whoever says is nothing but mistaken. This fact poses a challenge when trying to identify a stance with a polemic message. Rabbinical literature was written over a very long period stretching from the redaction of the Mishnah until after the Talmudic era. Should we search for the polemic aspects during the era of the homilies or at the time of the redaction of the essay when it was deemed correct to incorporate the words of the homilies? Identifying polemic trends does not always make it possible to determine whom came first and who reacted to who. It is possible that the early darshan is not aware of and may not even have been a part of the polemic dialogue. Despite these methodological minefields, in this lecture I will propose polemic aspects in the homilies dealing with these 2 figures while being aware of the difficulty of making exact polemic trends. I will now proceed to discuss the stages that led to positioning Doeg and Achitophel at the center of the Judeo-Christian polemic. The chapter in Mishnah Sanhedrin discussing those who have a share in the world to come opens with a declarative list of the types of sinners who do not have a share in the world to come. Later in the chapter, the Mishnah mentions individuals and groups of people who are not eligible for this special reward. The polemic aspects of the Mishnah are explicitly stated in the list of those who deny the principle of religion. Their punishment is that one of these principles does not apply to them. It seems that this is how we should understand the symbols in the groups of the biblical sinners and the list of the commoners. Doeg and Achitophel are mentioned along with Bil'am and Gehazi in the list of the commoners who do not have a share in the world to come, within the context of groups and individuals who symbolize theological adversaries. This fact strips them of their status as actual biblical figures and positions them as representations of an enemy sect. Research has placed the figures of Bil'am and Gehazi in rabbinic literature as direct representation of Jesus, or at the very least, as those who represent the most important figures of the religion. Thus, it is quite possible that Doeg and Achitophel are counted in the same category. One of the key beliefs of Christianity in the resurrection of Jesus after his crucifixion, the nature of life after his death and whether the resurrection was physical or spiritual are a question of debate in the Gospel in the New Testament. However, in Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians, he made the belief in the resurrection a religious belief that must not be questioned, declaring that the representation of Jesus are counted as the four commoners who do not have a share in the world to come is a polemic argument against perceiving Jesus as the Son of God who arose to a new life after his death. The wording of the prayer attributed to Rabbi Yochanan and his pupils, which they would say when they left the Beit Midrash, mentions Doeg and Achitophel as representation of sages who went astray, and they are mentioned alongside Gehazi and Jesus. I will read the translation to their prayer. When the sages took leave of the study hall of Rav Chisda, and some say it was the study hall of Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, they would say to him the following in accordance with the verse. Our leaders are laden. There is no breach and no going forth and no outcry in our open places. Our leaders are laden. Rav and Shmuel, and some say Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, disputed the proper understanding of this verse. One said, our leaders in Torah are laden with mitzvot, and one said, our leaders in Torah and mitzvot are laden with suffering. There is no breach that our faction of sages should not be like the faction of David from which Achitophel emerged, who caused a breach in the kingdom of David, and now going forth that our faction should not be like the faction of Shaul from which Doeg and the Edomite emerged, who set forth on an evil path, and no outcry that our faction should not be like the faction of Elisham from which Gehazi emerged, in our open places, that we should not have a child or student who overcooks his food in public, that is, who sins in public and causes others to sin, as in the well-known case of Jesus the Nazarene. The fact that the three figures mentioned in Mishnah Sanhedrin concerning those who do not have a share in the world to come and now mentioned in this prayer together with the figure of Jesus reinforce our assumption that these were all key figures in the Judeo-Christian polemic. Jesus' explicit sin was that he overcooked his food in public. We can learn from the timing of the prayer that was recited when leaving the study hall and the fact that Doeg and Achitophel were mentioned in conjunction with Jesus that they all belong to one group with identical characteristics. They are all accused of the sin of being wise men who went astray because they denied the principles of the Torah, and as a result, they are expelled from their communities. It is not difficult to guess that Rabbi Yochanan was addressing the Judeo-Christian of his time who continued to attend the synagogue, yet had adopted parts of the teaching of Jesus and his disciples. The homily of Pesikta de Rav Kahana to the verse in Yeshaya 54, Aniyah Soara, quotes a midrash claiming that Doeg and Achitophel mocked and insulted King David. The English translation of the midrash is as follows. O you sons of distinguished men, how long will you turn my glory into shame? In the phrase sons of distinguished men, David was addressing Doeg and Achitophel. In asking, how long will you turn my glory into shame? David meant, how long will you shame my glory by referring to me only as the son of Ishai instead of calling me by my own name? Wherefore comes not the son of Ishai? I have seen a son of Ishai. And will the son of Ishai give every one of you fields and vineyards? Have I no name of my own? How long will you take pleasure in vanity? How long will you take pleasure in dashing foolishly about with vain words, saying of me, the Holy One has abandoned him, forgotten him, henceforth kingship will never return to him. You expect the lost to continue forever? Do you really suppose that because my kingship was lost to me for a time, that it will be forever thus? The first part of the insults refers directly to David and can be seen as part of the negative dynamic that developed between David and those who wished to harm his kingdom. In the second part of the homily, the insults expressed by Achitophel are expanded and words are put in the mouth to state a theological claim that fits in well with the Christian doctrine of abandonment, that God no longer saw the Jews as the chosen people because of their sins. The words, the Holy One has abandoned him, forgotten him, henceforth kingship will never return to him, that are attributed to Doeg and Achitophel are nothing but Christian claims that wish to prove that the God now views Christians as the chosen people. An additional homily of Pesikta de Rav Kahana on the opening verse of the special Torah reading for Parashat Shkalim quotes a midrash with a similar theme. Here again, Doeg and Achitophel are quoted as provoking David. They are once again presented as opponents who state that David is not fit to rule. The verse from Psalms that is attributed to Doeg and Achitophel in the first part of the homily is attributed to the nation of the world in the second part. As in the first Pesikta we mentioned, the polemic ideas of the homily can be understood in light of how it is developed in the second part of the homily. How great are they that say of my soul, there is no help for him in God ever. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Ami and the rabbis differ as to whom David meant by they. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Ami identified them as Doeg and Achitophel. Why did David call them great? Because they were great in knowledge of Torah. That say of my soul, it was they who said in reproach of David, a man who seized a ewe lamb, murdered her shepherd, and caused Israelites to die by the sword, can such a man expect God's help? There is no help for him in God ever. The rabbis read the beginning of the verse, how many are they that say, and identify the they as the nation of the earth. That say of my soul, that is, they say of Israel, a people who on Mount Sinai heard from its God, thou should have no other gods before me, and then 40 days later said of a calf, this is the God, O Israel. Can such a people expect God's help? There is no help for it in God ever. The two parts of the Midrash describe how enemies clash over the right to exist kingdom of Israel and of the Jewish nation's right to exist. The abandonment doctrine regularly described the sins committed by the Jewish nation, and thus they were no longer worthy of being the chosen people, and emphasizes the sin of the golden calf as the decisive sin resulting in abandonment. The idea that the commandments were given as a punishment for the golden calf is one of the fundamental principles of Christian doctrine, that those who believe in the gospel are exempt from observing commandments. Placing Doeg and Achitophel words adjacent to those of the nations of the world make them both mouthpieces for Christian propaganda that tries to smear Knesset Israel and those who represent it with sin to explain the present dismal state and to justify their being abandoned. Thus, there are two examples of traditions about Doeg and Achitophel that contain hints to verses and ideas that form part of the explosive Judeo-Christian polemic during the period that the Christian religion was formed and expanded. Judas Iscariot and his actions are mentioned in 5 parts of the New Testament. With the existing details, it is difficult to form a coherent interpretation of this figure. When describing Judas Iscariot in the Gospel, the disciples gathered well-known biblical descriptions of evil and used them as the basis for constructing the image of the betrayer. According to the core of the early story as described in the Gospel of Mark and of Matthew, Judas is described as one of Jesus's closest students who denounced Jesus to the priests in a return for a monetary reward, leading to his execution and crucifixion by the Romans. When Judas realized that his betrayal had cost Jesus death, he returned the money to the priest and committed suicide by hanging himself. The idea of betrayal that leads to the death of the betrayed person is a parallel to Doeg's act. And the story of betrayal followed by suicide is parallel to Achitophel's act. Once an initial parallelism was formed between the figures by constructing Judas Iscariot as a mirror image of the biblical Doeg and Achitophel, we will examine the development of the traditions about the three figures and the ongoing links between them. Iscariot. Scholars have studied the etymology of the word Iscariot and proposed 6 possibilities for the meaning of this name. 3 of the 6 possibilities are connected to the figure of Doeg and Achitophel. One suggestion is that the 2 words Ish and Kariot are fused into one word that sounds similar to the word Sekel, which means red in Aramaic. According to this explanation, Judas was given the name Iscariot as an allusion to his hair or skin color. This fits in well with the Midrash description of Doeg as a redhead and with the later etymological homilies about Doeg, which ask why was he called the Edomi. A second suggestion is that the name denote the act of betrayal. Iscariot, Shkariot, Seker, Sheker, Seker, Seger, lie, breach, betray. The main sin committed by Doeg, similar to the committed by Judas Iscariot, is to betray the priests of Nov and deliver them to Shaul, leading to their being killed. Others explain the term as coming from the word askara, which indicates death by strangling, a parallel to the description of Achitophel's death. We will point to further parallels between the 3 figures. The relationship between Jesus and Judas Iscariot is linked to that of a rabbi and his students. Doeg and Achitophel are also mentioned in the same vein. Bread is mentioned in the New Testament as a central motif in the story of Judas Iscariot betrayal. The Jerusalem Talmud mentions David's request for the showbread as an excuse for betraying David to Shaul. The New Testament describes Judas Iscariot as the person who provides the necessary information to betray Jesus. In Midrash Ruth Rabbah, Doeg is mentioned as the one who incited Shaul to investigate David's nature and to conduct a thorough examination of whether he is fitting to be king because he descended from a Moabite. Using Christological exegesis. In many psalms, Jesus is explained as the hero, and his enemies are those idol worshippers who oppose Christianity, including those who deny the gospel doctrine, and in a wider manner, the Jews and their representative Judas Iscariot, who caused the crucifixion of Jesus. Alongside this exegesis, there are also Jewish exegesis that identify David's enemies mentioned in Psalms with Doeg and Achitophel. The following 2 texts show that on more than one occasion, the verses from Psalms that were selected by the homilies to describe Doeg and Achitophel betrayal are also used by the disciples who wrote the gospel and the founding fathers of the church to describe the wickedness of Judas Iscariot. For example, the verses in Psalms 54. It is not an enemy who binds me, I could bear it. It is not my foe who vaunts himself against me, I could hide from him. But it is you, my equal, my companion, my friend. Sweet was our fellowship, we walked together in God's house. The Mishnah of Avot interprets these verses as referring to Achitophel betrayal. However, in Augustine's interpretation, the verses refer to Judas Iscariot betrayal. Similarly, in the explanation of Psalms 3, verse 3 mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, the verse, many say of me, there is no deliverance for him through God, Selah, refers to Doeg and Achitophel. Here again, Augustine explains the verse as referring to Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him to prove that he is not able to save himself, and therefore he would not be able to save others. I have presented 2 out of 4 surprising rabbinic interpretation I have found that explain verses from Psalms as referring to a description of how Doeg and Achitophel harmed David. I have shown the parallel Christian exegesis of these same verses that interpret them as referring to the betrayal of Jesus by Judas Iscariot. I suggest that the existence of parallel homilies is evidence of the continuing Judeo-Christian polemic seen in the exegesis of Psalms surrounding the characters of Doeg and Achitophel and Judas Iscariot. I now will sum me up. In this lecture, I have traced the development of the mirror of image of Doeg and Achitophel characters, positioning them among groups of heretics, placed them as representatives of the theological opposition and not as ethical territories as could be understood from the biblical story. The Christian use of the mirror of Doeg and Achitophel is instead intended to denounce the criminal act of Judas Iscariot by attaching it to the action of the biblical wicked. What was the purpose of the use of the mirror of Judas Iscariot by the sages of the Midrash? We suggested that the sages' answer to this question was proposed by Rabbi Yochanan in his prayer. He explained that the 2 were indeed wise sages at the beginning, however, their heresy led them far astray. Use the hidden parallel, Rabbi Yochanan explained that the betrayal of Judas Iscariot, which is presented in the New Testament as stemming from monetary lust, occurred from the time he began to adopt the Christian faith. In this statement, Rabbi Yochanan denounced Judas Iscariot in the mirror of Doeg and Achitophel from the Jewish camp and claims that an act of betrayal can only occur among infidels. Judas Iscariot is not a part of Israel, and the Jewish people should not be blamed for the act of betrayal that led to the crucifixion of Jesus.